All right, thanks for joining the call, everybody. This is Aaron Murakami with A&P Electronic Media at emediapress.com, and our annual energy conference website is energyscienceconference.com. And we also have a new product page with some Rife-related technology and a Lukovsky multi-wave oscillator at vril.io. That's vril.io. Today we have Eric Dollard live on the call, and his website is ericpdollard.com. That's a middle initial P for Paul, ericpdollard.com. And EPD Laboratories, Inc. is a 501c3 nonprofit charitable corporation, so any donations are tax deductible. On ericpdollard.com, you can click on the donate link in the main menu bar, or you can just scroll down, and in the right column, you'll see how you can either donate by PayPal online, or there's a mailing address if you'd like to send checks or money orders. It does help the organization pay its bills. Not too long ago, we had finally paid off the building, and so there are annual insurance expenses, which we just paid right now, about $1,300. If anybody wants to pitch in through PayPal, that'd be helpful. We do have an upcoming conference in next July. It'll be the 9th annual Energy Science and Technology Conference in Hayden, Idaho, which is right next to Spokane, Washington. And that's going to be July 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, which is Wednesday through Saturday. Normally we have 4 days. Well, we started at 3. Now we have been having 4-day conferences, and this next year we may have 5 days, and we'll give everybody plenty of notice. Eric Dollard will be giving 2 presentations there, and will be assisting me in a presentation where I'll be doing some demonstrations based on some equipment that Eric has designed. If you want to pre-register for that, you can pre-register for the conference for free. It's at energyscienceconference.com, and we normally don't take payments until after the end of the year. It just makes accounting easier. We'll usually open up end of January, maybe sometime in February, for ticket sales. And Eric has been very busy on some writing projects right now, and some of the bench experiments and the seismic stuff is kind of temporarily put on hold a little bit because of lack of funding. And so he's deep in the writing. The 2 presentation names that Eric will be presenting at the next conference are Electromagnetic Induction and Its Propagation by Oliver Heaviside, the Heaviside theory of electromagnetism based on the Heaviside Maxwell equations. This is based on a long series of papers in 1885 in the British magazine called The Electrician, which is basically the first ever magazine dedicated to electrical engineering. And what Eric will present on that topic with the same name is essentially a sequel to that series of papers, which that series of papers is 250 pages. And his second presentation will be called The Method of Symmetrical Coordinates Applied to the Solution of Polyphase Networks by Charles Fortescue. And this is also based on a paper which was published in 1918, and Eric's presentation will essentially be a sequel to that as well. To start off with, Eric, do you want to kind of explain a little bit about the Heaviside one, what that paper is kind of about, and what your presentation will cover?
Yes, it's basically it's the Heaviside theory of electromagnetism, and but what I've done is I've made some improvements, which got started a long time ago in something called the Lone Pine writings of separating potential from EMF and displacement current from conduction current, and then I applied that to Heaviside's transmission line adaptation of Maxwell's equations, and have come up with a very simple algebraic representation of electromagnetism that I don't think anybody has really accomplished before. Normally it's just page after page of complex differential equations and what have you. I've managed to simplify the whole thing down and come up with some very interesting results in applying my methodologies to Heaviside's original equations. There's a lot of misinformation about Heaviside and his relationship to Maxwell's equations and what Maxwell's equations really are and all that type of stuff, to the point where the best thing to do is just to forget about Maxwell's equations altogether. There never really were any Maxwell's equations. The academians absolutely despise Oliver Heaviside for his Promethean effort of stealing the math from the gods and turning it into something that allowed for the development of long-distance telephone and telegraph, hence the American Telephone and Telegraph Corporation. So I'm working on that presently. It's a very stimulating project because I'm discovering all kinds of interesting things. So it's kind of a learn as I go, because I enjoy experimenting. Situation as such now, I cannot experiment with anything electrical. I do not have a working laboratory. Very expensive to build a working laboratory, so it's been almost 10-year anniversary since my Landers facility was destroyed, and I'm starting to lose hope that I'll ever be able to do any research on that level again. So, as Philo Farnsworth taught me a long, long time ago, when I was living in the bushes next to his house, when you don't have any equipment, you can use mathematics. So that's what I'm doing. And then a new project popped up, which hopefully can be set up by the time of the next conference, is we were asked by somebody who has a 75,000 RPM Tesla turbine, what am I going to use for a generator? Well, that's a good question. And then it dawned on me, well, if the Tesla parallel disk turbine runs a parallel disk variable capacitor, at that RPM, it's possible to produce an electrostatic generator with no magnets or field coils or anything magnetic at all, and it would be a perfect mechanical match to the turbine. And then the remarkable thing is when I went to search for papers on the subject, the one principal paper that has the engineering solutions for using a spinning variable capacitor as a motor or generator was developed by Donald Trump's uncle, John Trump. So what we're going to endeavor to do is there's a very special modulation amplifier, AM modulator, being constructed to develop the high voltage audio frequency waveforms to make this variable capacitor that was built by Chris Carson long, long time ago when we worked on that together, and see if we can make this thing spin as a motor with no magnets or field coils. I think that would be a rather remarkable demonstration. So that's another thing I'm working on. It'll be a whole rack worth of equipment to develop the necessary voltages to do this. And some very unusual and hard to find transformers were procured. So that's plugging along right now to get that built. Aaron's building that, and I'm just doing the theory here. And then this upcoming week, there'll be a lengthy interview, video interview, where I'm going to get into the power grid situation and what the whole deal is with PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. I got my start with Pacific Gas and Electric when I was 6 years old, and then was officially in a training program when I was in the 5th grade. My grandfather worked for Pacific Gas and Electric, and the engineering practices that I learned in my childhood from PG&E, I've continued to apply to this day in all outside plant work, the stuff that you've seen in the pictures with the cross arms and what have you. So I think that's about it as far as what's going on. And we can continue with the calls, I guess, or whatever you want to do, Aaron.
Okay. So one of the things you mentioned with the Charles Fortescue presentation that you're going to be giving, you mentioned Lone Pine writings. And Lone Pine writings,
the Fortescue paper, the sequel to that that's what I derived my versor algebra writings out of. So I'm going to get kind of into the basic theory, generalized theory of these symmetrical coordinate systems, as they were called. I've been using them in some of my past presentations, particularly the power grid presentation. So I'm going to, like I will do with the Heaviside, I'm going to simplify the whole thing by using some of my own developments, mathematical developments, and demonstrate its application to three-phase motors and what have you. So that I haven't started on that one yet, but I have a lot of notes from the versor algebra and Steinmetz stuff that I can apply. So once I wrap up this electromagnetic induction one, then I'll start on that and I'll be able to say more about how that's going to go.
Yeah, and both the Lone Pine writings and the versor algebra part 1 book are on Amazon. There are ebooks. LonePineWritings.com, you can get the ebook version of Lone Pine Writings. On Amazon, it's called A Common Language for Electrical Engineering, Lone Pine Writings. But if you go to Amazon and search for Lone Pine Writings by Eric Dollard, you'll see the paperback there. Also, there's versor algebra as applied to polyphase power systems. I believe that's the whole title. But if you type in Eric Dollard and versor algebra in Amazon, that paperback was released right before the conference this year, so in June or early July. And Versor Algebra 2 is going to be coming out pretty soon. We've had the ebook available for a while. There's been some formatting work done to put it in another 6x9 Amazon template, and I'm sending the final draft to Eric for his review. And so hopefully within about a month or less, Versor Algebra 2 will be on Amazon as a paperback as well. Also, when Eric is mentioning the rotary electrostatic converter, which is that rotating capacitor built by Chris Carson, just a few days ago, I released a video from 2017 where Peter Lindemann and Eric Dollard are talking about this rotating capacitor in my shop, along with myself and Jeff Moe. And I don't know, that video is maybe 20, 25 minutes long or something. But if you want to kind of see what that rotary capacitor looks like, it's in that video. You can go to emediapress.com, and one of the most recent blog posts is on that rotary electrostatic converter. There was mention of trying to light a bulb or neon, which wouldn't work, but that's because the capacitor is not even excited by a high voltage supply yet. And I just kind of got it out so we can just kind of look at it, you know, so that wasn't really intended to be like a real experiment or demonstration, just kind of talking about it. Let's see. So as far as these papers, now the interview you said that you're going to be doing pretty soon, is that going to be filmed by Scott Hensler?
Yeah, he's going to do the interview. So basically, he's preparing it right now. So it's going to be derived from the paper I wrote called "The Electrical Utility in the Digital Age," and then the very lengthy presentation I did, which I don't remember the title of exactly, but it was nearly 6 hours long, on the what was that called? The history, theory, and practice of the electrical utility system, I believe.
Yes.
That will be part of the basis for the interview. So, at any rate, it's kind of a big concern of what in the hell's going on with the power companies and all of that type of stuff. And I think the power companies might be getting a little more blame than they deserve. And I basically will somewhat take the side of Pacific Gas and Electric because they were so important in getting me where I am today. But I will also point out how they're going wrong and the relation to other utility companies. There's one utility company in particular that does not suffer from a lot of these problems, at least not yet. And I'll get into some comparisons. I don't know if I'm going to name any of these utility companies because I don't want to get myself in trouble or really jump on anybody or make any trouble for anybody that doesn't deserve it. So I'll be kind of obscure about whose lines start fires all the times and whose lines are built so well that you don't have to turn them off during a windstorm because they don't cause any problems. One other thing, as far as the Heaviside presentation goes, is the elements of that are on my website. So there's a collection of diagrams under the title, I believe, Electromagnetic Boundary Condition. So that's the beginning of the mathematical development. Right now I'm 150 pages into the notes, writing to go with that, but the lights are on and the water's running and the cars are working fine, and I got a desk and plenty of paper and pens, so at least I can keep writing. That's better than nothing. I don't have to do it all in the front seat of my car anymore, which is kind of tough when the steering wheel gets in the way. So I think that's about it on what I got going.
Okay. So this electrical utility and digital age paper is on ericpdollard.com, and if you go to, there's a link there for free papers, and I think they may be listed in there as well as the electromagnetic boundary condition paper, and if not, you can just search electromagnetic boundary in the search box on ericpdollard.com and you'll find that. One thing I wanted to ask you, Eric, is that, we've talked about energy and that pretty much everybody uses the term energy incorrectly, as most people don't actually know what energy is, and it appears that, Heaviside is one of the only, if not the only one who appears to properly define it, as we kind of discussed, that it's this process of kind of this transition between potentials or whatever. Do you want to kind of maybe take a minute to kind of explain your understanding of Heaviside's explanation of what energy is and how that term has been, seriously misused?
Well, energy is really kind of a mathematical fiction. It's a transitional state between electric induction and electric power, and it really only exists in a storage or potential form where it's defined as the ability to do work, but it's a phantom. It's not really the main element. This is what I got into in the Lone Pine Writings book. It's actually the electric induction in the CGS units of what I call the Planck, which is the product of the magnetism and the dielectricity. And as Steinmetz points out, from the electrical engineer's standpoint, it's really electric power and not energy. That's what's going on. And electric power is defined as the process of doing work. So energy is like I say, it's kind of a phantom that can sit in a capacitor, or it can sit in an inductor, or it can sit in a transmission line in a static state. But when the electromagnetic process is in action, the energy terms completely vanish, as well as the forces that the electric field exerts on the conductor. So, and being that we use electromagnetic transmission lines to convey electric power, we always want to keep the power flow balanced in such a way that it remains electromagnetic and no energy gets bound up in the line, that everything is delivered to the sending end, appears at the receiving end without reflections or pauses or anything like that. So I'll get a little, as I progress in writing this presentation, I will get a little more definite about this stuff. But it was interesting to see all this unfold mathematically. That has never appeared anywhere ever before, and to algebraically go straight from the Heaviside-Maxwell's equations into actually calculating the forces on the wires and other things which you cannot find in any engineering textbook. So this will kind of be a new approach to the understanding of electromagnetism and also in the education of electrical engineers, assuming that such a thing even exists or desired anymore.
So this history, theory, and practice of the electrical utility system, this is a presentation that's a little over 5 hours long. This was given by Eric at last year's 2018 Energy Science and Technology Conference. And if you want to look at that, that's available through emediapress.com/Eric Dollard/utility. And this goes through the whole history of, everything from light bulbs to the type of generators used, all the way up to how the grid appears to, possibly be sabotaged or whatever to actually turn it into an antenna. So if there happens to be an EMP, that it's guaranteed it'll do as much damage as possible. And this is what the grid has turned into. Whether it's intentional or not, I don't know, but that presentation goes into it pretty deep. And at this year's conference was the Eric's presentation on theory, calculation, and operation of the Colorado Springs Tesla transformer, where he gave the full how-to on what the Colorado Springs Tesla transformer actually is, how it works, along with a 20-to-1 scale model replica of it, including lighting a 500-watt incandescent bulb with one wire, and about half a dozen various demonstrations that Eric showed using that setup. And at the 2020 conference next July, Adrian Marsh from the UK is going to be shipping over some equipment and some demo units, which is kind of related to some of what Eric showed. And I had sent out a blog link before. If you search for Adrian Marsh in the search bar at emediapress.com, you'll see a little bit about his work and a link to his website. And somebody who brought some of the equipment to run these Tesla coils at the conference took them home prematurely. And so Adrian Marsh was instrumental in doing a makeshift setup using my personal Lakhovsky multi-wave oscillator pulse modulator to excite these coils and do a few demonstrations. But he'll be there next year, and we'll be rewinding those Tesla coils to do some other experiments. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. But if you're interested in Eric's Tesla demonstration, it's the definitive, most comprehensive analysis of Tesla's Colorado Springs transformer that's ever been given. And that's at emediapress.com/Eric Dollard/Tesla. Let's see, is there anything else you want to cover, Eric, before we go into open up for questions?
Now that you brought the Tesla thing up, there's something that I just watched a Tesla, I guess biography you would call it, that was produced out, what country was it out of? Yugoslavia or Serbia?
Let's see, Janja is from Slovenia.
Okay. Yeah, it kind of got me thinking about a lot of this stuff again. So it starts off showing how Einstein kind of got the equations screwed up for energy, and that this transmission is not really through the air, it's into the earth, and a number of important things were pointed out. But as all such documentaries, it lapses into the academics' interpretations of Tesla, which are hideous. So I think I've already pointed out that with the energy gluttony that we have today, that if it was all to be done through the telluric transmitting system, the Earth would explode in a series of violent earthquakes, so that's not really practical. And the academians want to turn it all into microwaves like the 5G and then crank the power up to such a level that that it runs all your silly phones and everything, but we all know what that will do to the human organism. And it kind of just makes it look like, well, Tesla came and went, and what a wonder world of digital confusion and silly phones and microwaves he gave us. Well, that ultimately wasn't his intent. So it would lead one to ask, what use is Nikola Tesla in today's age? Well, there is one use. Now that we have these people talking about going to Mars and setting up situations in the solar system, what's needed is a communication system that has no attenuation or delay. that contradicts the Einsteinian velocity of light concept and what have you. And that is latent in Tesla's work, and I've laid a pretty good theoretical basis for all of that in many of my presentations, but it's not even nearly on an engineering level. But it would be interesting to get the necessary so-called experts together that would be willing to cooperate on this and see if that that could possibly be developed. I think that's probably, in our present day and age, one of the most important aspects of Tesla's of knowledge and understanding and experiments is to come up with a extraluminal communication system. And it's my belief that if a group of people get together and have an absolute intent on producing something, that anything is possible. I think there's a biblical saying, if two or more gather in my name, or something like that. I don't exactly remember, but I know that from my own experiences that it is possible to tap into the creative force and make things happen. So that would be interesting, but all these things, require people and money and what have you. But at any rate, that did come to my mind today just before engaging in this telephone conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is one presentation by Eric, I think this was maybe in 2014, extraluminal transmission systems of Tesla and Alexanderson, which kind of goes heavy into those extraluminal concepts. I guess not necessarily faster than the speed of light, but extraluminal meaning outside of the so-called light speed constraint framework. But that's at extraluminaltransmission.com. If you're interested in that presentation, I believe it's probably about 4 hours long, like most of them.
What I did in that is it what I did was kind of re-educate people to an understanding of electricity that would allow for the understanding of a type of propagation that does not involve velocity. That's something that's very prominent in what I'm doing with the Heaviside work right now. Is velocity is basically a fiction, and so why chain oneself to it? And then at the end, I have like 4 or 5 different examples of transmission systems that really didn't go along with the velocity of light, or there was more voltage at the receiving end than there was at the sending end, and various things that the academic physicist would just flat out say is impossible, but these things are present in the utility system as it exists today. Then the one that actually gets into the analog networks and the mathematical relationships involved that takes velocity out of the equation in a very concrete manner, is that one was called electric transmission in multiple coordinate systems. And what I did there is I basically took the work of the pioneering Bell Telephone Laboratory scientists and engineers, and then worked that material into removing velocity as we understand it from the transmission equations, and then a way to build this on analog networks, which I know a lot of people are interested in that. I've been involved in that in a long time, going back to the old Borderland videos where we demonstrated that these Tesla transformers, the velocity of light no longer has any meaning. So basically those 2 presentations work together. And then on YouTube, there's a presentation that I did for the Santa Barbara Ham Radio Club, directed to the ham radio type person that experiments and what have you, to kind of give these guys an idea how to start building transmission systems that may behave in this manner. So between all that, basically the theoretical basis is laid down for how could we possibly achieve such a communication system that does not have the normal attenuation and delay.
Yeah, this video you're mentioning, that's the one with Chris Carson, SBARC.
Yeah.
SBARC. Yeah. So let's see. I'm going to see if this is, I think this is on your website. Yeah, so if you go to ericpdollard.com, And in the search bar in the left side, if you type in SBARC, what does that stand for? Santa Barbara Amateur Radio Club?
I think so, yeah.
So if you search SBARC, you'll see a little excerpt of a link, and you can click the link at the bottom of it, and it'll bring the video right up in the post. It's about a little under an hour. It's about 50 minutes long or so. And that's with Chris Carson, who developed that rotary electrostatic converter, that rotating capacitor, which was based on Eric's theories and math and everything. So you'll get to hear from Chris Carson directly. Let's see. Yeah, you also mentioned that documentary. So in this documentary, I guess it's kind of more for the layman. It doesn't go super deep into the technical stuff. It's a lot of human interest kind of stuff about Tesla. It's by Janja Glagovac, who I believe it was maybe 2016 at the conference, she went there and did some interviews with some of the presenters, and Eric is in the documentary, Peter Lindemann, Paul Babcock, Jim Murray, and then some other people, mostly Europeans, I think. But that documentary is called Teslafy Me, Tesla FY, like Teslafy, ME. And if you go to emediapress.com and you look at some of the recent blog posts, there's one in there with 3 different trailers for Teslafy Me. And then there's a link to Amazon where you can buy the DVD. I don't know, it might make a good Christmas present. And it's suitable for the layman because, again, it doesn't go super deep into the technical stuff. And it's also, you can pay for a live streaming on Amazon Prime or Comcast Xfinity. And that documentary, I think it's, I don't know, maybe about close to an hour and a half or something. Let's see. And I'll put links to all this in the as subtitles in the video when I get this put on YouTube. Let's see. Is there anything else that you want to cover, Eric, before I open up for questions?
No, I think that's it.
That's it. Okay. Okay, so yeah, if you have any questions, I see you got your hand up, Jeremy. And for anybody else, if you have any questions, just hit 5 star, and that'll put a little symbol up next to your phone number, and then I'll just state the last 4 of your digits of your phone number and unmute you, and then just go and say your name, where you're from, and go and ask your question. So I'll start with Jeremy here. Give me a second to unmute you there. Okay, go ahead, Jeremy.
Hi, hear me okay?
Yeah, hear you just fine.
Okay. I guess this question is on the subject of seismic forecasting from the lecture this year. So I've been attempting to receive the telluric signals using spaced grounding rods in the VLF spectrum, but I keep running into problems with local noise and interference. The first station I have it's up and running 24/7 in Southern California, but I don't think it'll pick up anything useful because of the interference. I've seen other researchers looking into the ELF spectrum as well as static Coulomb charge density, the field mill sensors you'd use to forecast and detect lightning strikes. Eric, besides the long line technique you use yourself, are there any other methods that you think might have merit to them in terms of seismic forecasting systems?
Yeah, the magnetometer method developed by Tony Fraser-Smith at Stanford University.
Really?
Yeah, that's...
could you say that one more time?
That's tried and true, so I don't have the means to put any of that together, and I can't get much cooperation from people in that neighborhood to help me with it, but there are definite magnetometer disturbances.
Okay. If I understand right, I think the Schumann resonance, the ELF reception, 1 to 40 cycles, I believe most of those use a magnetic method for reception. So that would line up with that.
Yeah, that I'm not certain about. I haven't done any real work with any of this. But electric wave method below 300 cycles per second, it seems to be most of the seismic precursors occur in the voice frequency band. And I've kind of discounted the whole Schumann resonance thing anyway. There's certain things about it that don't make any sense to me. From my lengthy research at Landers, the frequencies that seem to be predominant resonance-wise are between 9 and 18 kilocycles per second, which no one would ever believe, but I'm not going to argue with what the oscilloscope showed me. So there's a last-ditch, what would you call it, documentation of the Landers facility just before it was destroyed, where I attempted to show what was going on there before the place was wiped out. Needless to say, I'm not in a very good state of mind, and the people that came to do the documentation were useless, so the camera is constantly flying around in space like it's tied to a monkey's back, and what have you. But I distilled that down in a shorter presentation that I gave at Aaron's conference called Electrodynamic Seismic Forecasting, and the feature in that was what is called the VAN method, V-A-N, out of the three people in Greece that built a electric potential methodology that had well over 90% accuracy in forecasting and could even determine the magnitude and location. And then they came up with a certain dimensional mathematical process where they could do this stuff analytically by timing all the prior earthquakes and running them through this mathematical process, and then they would get a result of when the future earthquake would be, and that also turned out to be quite reliable. So needless to say, their work was suppressed and what have you, even though they were world famous, and basically their long lines were, shut off by the phone company, and they're the same old story. But it did work, and it would be nice if somebody could get over there to Greece and find out where the terminals are at and mark them before they get lost, because apparently this stuff is very location specific. It's not like my system. It doesn't work on waves. It works on current flow, so you've got to connect the geologies where that current comes to the surface. And,
essentially, you'd have to straddle two different locations with different potentials in order to measure it.
Yeah, you have to do they did a lot of trial and error, sensing and experimenting, but it worked. And that's what's important, and that's why I featured it, because it worked again and again and again and again. And there's no way that anybody can rightfully say that electrical seismic forecasting is a crock, because it does work. I'll give an example of basically how simple it is. What I do when I'm out and around living in my car, which I haven't been doing a lot of lately, but when I am out there, I have two setups. Has anyone seen pictures of my car? They notice that there's two very lengthy or high antennas on the snout. One of those connects to the AM radio, and I have detuned the AM radio so that it operates in the maritime allocation around 500 kilocycles, and that's my noise, my ionospheric, my noise radio, and then I have a voice frequency amplifier with a high impedance input built for my car by Steve McGreevy. That connects to the other antenna, and that does all the ultra-low frequency reception. So when the Ridgecrest earthquake occurred, it was very unfortunate that I wasn't in Lone Pine with this arrangement, because then I would have been able to forecast the earthquake. I would have come in the coffee shop in the morning telling everybody, okay, it's going to happen, and then right when I closed my mouth, it would have hit. That would have really been something. But at any rate, I wasn't there. I was up in Oregon basically, my outdoor life now is in Oregon because California and what have you, as we all know, what's happening there. So I have the AM radio on and the ultra-low frequency receivers running in tandem. The ultra-low frequency receiver did not pick anything up, but the AM radio sounded like it literally was trying to chew its way out of the car. The noise was beyond comprehension. And there were no hurricanes or anything like that to produce that kind of noise storm. And then, sure enough, that was the precursor to the Ridgecrest earthquake. And this is the third time now that the ionospheric medium frequency noise method has worked for seismic forecasting. And because it works on wave propagation, it's not specific to geology, and with 3 stations in a triangular configuration, using that methodology, either in the voice frequency band or in the medium wave band, or however you want to go about it, with a beverage antenna, you could hone right in on where the earthquake's going to come from. So at Landers, using voice frequency reception on the overground beverage antenna, which was capacitively coupled to the ionosphere, there was a 48-hour precursor to the earthquake in Japan. At the Bolinas station, there was a 12-hour precursor to the Big Bear Landers earthquake in Southern California. And in Landers, I had just started the differential ground rod voice frequency reception, and the precursors there were such that the owner of the property was like calling frantically around trying to get whatever engineers he knew to get there to interpret what the hell these sounds were, shrieking sounds coming out of the speaker, and that preceded the Landers earthquake, and that was the beginning of all this, and then that's what got me started on this whole voice frequency electrodynamic seismic forecasting and developing the new type of Alexanderson antenna and the rest of the stuff that happened there that I'm hoping that I can at least somewhat approximate. Again, with what I got now, I do have lengthy facilities out in the desert, and I have accumulated all necessary components and equipment, but the infrastructure complications of getting, the buildings retrofitted and developing the mine and all that are cost prohibitive, and I don't have any help at all anymore, so I'm pretty much on my own.
Okay. Hey, Jeremy, we have a lot of questions. People want to ask if you have another question. I'm going to go ahead and meet you out. And if
I'll
you
take
have,
it later. That's fine.
Yeah, more questions. We'll get some other people. Okay, appreciate it.
Roger.
Okay, this electrodynamic seismic forecasting presentation, that one is available at emediapress.com/Eric Dollard /musical seismograph. The musical seismograph one, that's quite a presentation. I think that's probably about 4 hours or so as well. And that's when I went down to Eric's lab, and we went out to the mine, went into the mine. He shows the demonstration of the Tesla converter that he developed, and we're doing some benchtop demonstrations of that. It's actually probably about 4 or 5 different presentations all wrapped in one. They're all related to each other, but each section also kind of stands on its own. And if you scroll down past that musical seismograph one, you'll see the electrodynamic seismic forecasting, and that was the second presentation that Eric did this year. And I think that one was maybe about 90 minutes or something like that. It's probably the shortest one Eric's ever done. And also, I just want to let you all know that for a little while now, we're going to keep this discount coupon code going. So if you want any of these digital book or video packages, the coupon code is CYBER33, all capital letters, CYBER 33. That's CYBER 33, and you get 33% off any of the book or video packages. Not just Eric's, but pretty much anything in the catalog. If you go to emediapress.com and you scroll down, you'll see a list of all the presentations from 2018 and 2019. And if you mouse over the home menu item in the main menu bar, you'll see Home 2. And if you click on Home 2 and scroll down, you'll see pretty much everything that's been published. And when you click on the buy button on any of these, it'll take you to the shopping cart. And in the right column, if you scroll down, you'll see a place where you can enter the Cyber 33 coupon code and hit apply, and that'll take the 33% off. And again, that's all capital letters. Let's see if you're, yeah, and if we can keep the questions just kind of brief. We're going on 47 minutes now, but we can go as long as anybody wants to stay on the call if Eric's up for it. Last 4 digits of your number is 3926. Go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Eric. You're amazing, and I think you know that. So this is an awesome honor, and I was so excited just to be like in the same sphere as you. So I'm working on a book that is basically a summation of politics, history, religion, and it's taking a look at like where the world is today. And the main goal of it is to kind of it's a really special time for humanity, and to overcome all those men in turbines and all that kind of stuff that dominates the world, and a new world order and how to make things better. But anyways, I'm working on my energy file and Tesla file and kind of like the solution to the energy crisis, and how do we start doing things in a way that is in harmony with nature. And I guess I just had a couple of questions about Tesla and some of the things that he accomplished.
What is your name?
Darlene.
Okay, thanks, Darlene.
Yeah. So I have read that at kind of the end when Tesla was achieving first the electrostatic ray, and then he was achieving it's the radiant energy, the huge electrostatic bursts of ray, like radiant energy, streams of ether under various states of kinetic pressure, and we know that he was able to, he said he could transmit pictures, thoughts, emotions, and I'm not talking about like the kind of ray that he achieved that was the stinging type, but the other type. And he said that he was able to even replace like the large systems with the overhead capacitors, and with a very small system to kind of draw in this sort of energy that he was able to harness, but on like in a way that I don't know. And so I don't feel that it's fair that you would say that all ether, like that when you're trying to harness, like I wouldn't call it the difference between protons and electrons, but when you're trying to harness this sort of energy that is wasted, as like it's going to cause excess heat, or that like you're only going to get electrons. But like, do you have any insight as to, and I'm studying the difference, the back and forth between magnetism and the dielectric, and the work of Kenneth Wheeler on his work on magnetism I'm just getting into right now, and it's incredible. But do you have any insight as to what, and okay, so this one more sentence I want to read. So polarized when protons, when a space is polarized when protons fill the space between the negative and positive electrons, and the space is depolarized when electrons fill the space. And I know that you've spoken a lot about electrons are just the end of the dielectric fields. So let's see, let me try and sum up my question. I mean, I know you don't have a lot of hope for like humanity and stuff just with all like the repression that you've seen, but do you have any thoughts on what would be the energy source that we're harnessing, and we're calling it, you know, the ether? And like, do you have any? Can you say what that is exactly? Like whether you think it's like a proton, or I'm finding it's maybe like a proton, but
yeah, I don't subscribe too much to the conventional electron theories or any of that, but. And as you pointed out, if you just keep sucking in more and more so-called energy, there's going to be a side effect. And energy is actually the thing to stay away from, and go more directly. How Tesla was going to harness this radiant matter, which is actually the proper name for it, is apparently the Earth is inundated with a massive flux of these cosmic rays that only Tesla was able to detect. And I think he was the one that actually coined the name cosmic rays, and everybody absolutely refused to believe it until somebody else ran across it and then erased Tesla's name and put his name into place. I forget who that was.
I find it to be more of a fundamental.
And so that's what Tesla had hoped to harness, was this flux of cosmic rays. That was his theory about radioactivity, is there's not really any stored energy in the inner atomic spaces or whatever that the nuclear guys talk about, but it's actually when these cosmic rays disrupt something inside the atomic structure that then you get the energy out in a transformed manner where the cosmic rays were not detectable or produce no physical effects. Once it interacts with the atom that has the proper characteristics, then it appears as an energy or field, or however you would want to describe it out. There's not really a lot known about that. It was actually Sir William Crookes was the one that started all this, and Tesla was a follower of Crookes.
Yeah.
These ideas go completely contrary to anything that physicists deal with today.
Yes, of course they do. And in the work of Le Bon, sorry, just one question about that. So when when concentrated sunlight is going on to the metals and it's turning them radioactive, it probably just has to do with like the super concentration of sunlight that he was beaming, and that all that stuff is really interesting, frequency and harmonics of yeah. But thank you. So like you.
Okay, I didn't quite get that. I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding.
Yeah, Darlene, your phone sounds to be cutting out a little bit.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. You guys are, Mr. Dollard, you're incredible. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Darlene.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. Winston, I'm going to unmute you there. Go ahead.
Hi, Eric. So 2 questions. So one, the first one about the seismic forecasting. Now, I was trying to replicate something that you've done somewhere in the past. Now, I have a Sierra frequency selective voltmeter, and that's connected to a 300 loop, magnetic loop. And I don't get too much of power line interference, but around 10 o'clock at night usually, I'm able to get the marine submarine transmitters, but then also the typical crackles and pops of the Earth at around 15, 16 kilocycles. Now, I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, what type of Sierra selective voltmeter do you have? That's a good instrument for this. What's the lowest frequency that it goes down to?
It's a KS-1-15538.
Okay, so that was made for Bell Telephone. Do you know what the lowest frequency is on it?
It goes down to 0 kilocycles.
Oh, okay, so you got the good one. Yeah, I wish I had one of those here. I got some that can be overhauled, but they're in pretty bad shape. There's one problem using a loop, is that the response is directly proportional to frequency, so you're going to get a really bad frequency response complication. The advantage of the loop is you can kind of null out interference, but the problem is the signal that you're trying to receive might be in the same direction as the interference, but it is a way to start. What in specific did you want to know about what you were picking up?
The exact pops and crackles before a major seismic event, what exactly does it sound like?
You'll start getting coherent, like shrieking or whistling signals in the voice frequency range.
Okay. Because
so
I just
what it'll do is the sounds will start to become less transient sounding, like clicks and pops, and they'll start to chirp.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll progress further, and the chirps will start sounding like ricocheting bullets and spinning noises and what have you, and then eventually it just coalesces into a very narrow band signal, kind of like a scream. But I've heard other recordings where it might sound like gongs, but generally what happens is it starts to become less random and more coherent. So that's what you're listening for, is when the signals start to get a very coherent, somewhat musical sound rather than just a staticky, snaps and pops and what have you.
I see. And
so
instead of using...
How bad is your power line interference? Are you away from all that? What utility company do you have that runs your power?
That I forgot at the moment, but it's not. I think it's a delta Y, because there's definitely not a Y-to-Y connection. I could place two rods in the ground 100 feet apart, and I don't get a single sound or any readings.
Okay, well then, the best thing to use is two rods 1,000 feet apart. Have a pair of those configurations at right angles to each other, and then get a like 150 ohm to 600 ohm audio transformer, and then use that to couple the ground rod, differential ground rod connections to your measuring instruments. And basically, if you build a like 20 kilocycle low pass filter to get the Navy signal out, it's important to get the Navy signal out because that just overwhelms everything. You can't really turn your gain up. You can get that out with a low pass filter. I built a system for somebody in San Luis Obispo using the differential ground rod method, which is much, much better than the loop because it's got a flat frequency response, and you're receiving out of the ground rather than receiving something that comes out of the ground and then try to receive that. So you can get that filter and the impedance matching. All you basically really need is a stereo amplifier with a dynamic microphone input or some kind of low-level input, or a microphone preamplifier connected to a stereo amplifier. And when you have the Navy signal out of there, you won't burn your speakers up and burn your amplifier out with the sounds you can't hear, or drive the neighbor's dog wild with 25 kilocycle sound that you can't hear, but the dog can hear all too well. I've seen that problem before too. And then you're pretty much set up.
Oh, good. Because I know that mainly Los Angeles, like you said, that the transformer connection, the neutrals are not tied together. So, but I think in parts of Pasadena that it's a pretty bad problem. So I would have to go near the desert areas.
You got the LA Department of Water and Power has set the engineering standards for the publicly owned utility companies there. Glendale's got their own. Pasadena, I thought, was Southern California Edison, but their primaries are all delta there also. So the voltages are higher, but they don't have the YY connection yet.
Okay.
They probably will eventually be forced to do it. I think that's either 12,000 volts or 16. I'm not certain. I'm sure. I think it's 12,470 if I remember right. Their system's pretty quiet.
Yeah. And then my second question is just the telluric current. What exactly is the magnitude? Because I read somewhere, I think it was a Feynman lecture, I'm not too sure on it, but the voltage and current that could be verified, received at the Earth, what is what I'm looking for? It's around 400 kilovolts and about 1,800 amps. So I'm not sure if that's entirely correct, or if you've been able to measure something similar.
I'm not quite certain. You're talking about a naturally occurring?
Yeah, not man-made.
Yeah, I'm not certain about that, but I know that that prior to an earthquake, you can get many millions of amperes of current flowing in the earth, enough to magnetize everybody's tools and what have you. So that happened before the Landers earthquake. It wiped out everybody's color TV picture tubes, and tools were magnetized. There's a scientist that's done extensive research in that. I know him personally. His name is Friedemann Freude, and we got together and he showed me that the current flow can reach almost insane values, and of course whatever electromotive force that goes with that is also going to be pretty severe, and that's what produces a lot of these glow phenomena and what have you. It's the same thing as when you get an EMF disruption in the engine room of a submarine and the fireballs start chasing sailors around, burning them in the butt. So, a similar situation.
I've read somewhere that supposedly, yeah, that's supposedly a UFO of some sort. It's not true, but there is more to the electrical aspects of it. A precursor to an earthquake, prior to an earthquake.
Yeah, I prefer to use the radio wave method because it's directional, and then I can tell, with a number of stations, I can tell where it's coming from, and I'm familiar with it. But the magnetometer methodology would be what would be measuring those currents. And as far as the EMF goes, I have had transients come out of the ground that were strong enough to actually weld together bad connections in the field telephone wire that I was using for the experiment. So that would be probably around the order of 400 or 500 volts. I know from Bell System practices that between distant central offices that you can get potential differences as high as up to 500 volts between offices just of the natural EMF that's inside the earth from the telluric currents. So you have to kind of protect your receiving equipment against this stuff if you're starting to really get long stretches out there, like miles and miles. I think the system in Greece had a 30-mile long line between one point and another.
And then just one last thing. How is the solar flux proportional to precursors to an earthquake? Because I remember you saying that on solar minimums, that there are spikes in solar flux, and that usually dictates a major earthquake or something.
Yeah, it's very difficult to correlate solar activity with earthquakes. When I was doing, the study at Landers and recording all this data, there was a very tight correlation between solar flares and the earthquake activity. I think I showed that in my presentation. But it also has been recently pointed out that during solar minimums, there's an overall magnetic shift that occurs in the magnetic field of the Earth that also causes large earthquakes. So the solar flux is the solar flux and the ionosphere conditions are good to monitor along with everything else, because a lot of times these things do move all together, but it's not a definite correlation for every case.
Because I was seeing that a chart from 1960 to present day, the solar flux, that most of the major earthquakes occurred on the solar minimums, but that was just an occurrence. But then also recently, since the solar flux has been around, 66, maybe a couple months ago.
Yeah, the solar activity is coming back. So my daily measurements when I'm out in the field with the antennas in my cars would indicate that the sun has brightened up considerably.
Yeah.
There's some major changes in radio propagation.
Because there were a few, I think last month, a few major earthquakes in Indonesia or somewhere around there, but it only happened when there was a sudden spike in the solar flux. Maybe one day it went from 68 to 70, or even 71, and then there was a major earthquake on the other side.
It got up to 71, but there's nothing really exciting going on. But the problem is this information is being taken away from us. So almost all the radio broadcasts that give you the various conditions like solar flares, weather, all that's being taken away because of the political objectives of the regime that has taken this country over. So that's made it not only losing major facilities, but not even being able to pick up the public service broadcast anymore. No more weather on WWV. You can get the solar flux, but they won't give you the times and magnitudes of flares anymore. They give you some generic, activity indicator. It's a deliberate effort to herd the cattle into the chute of the internet, and so that you can get a bunch of confusing information that's meaningless or deliberately fudged. So we're kind of being thrown back into the situation of the 19th century, where you got to figure out how to do everything yourself with pieces of wood and brass and what have you.
There's only one website reliable that I know of right now, that it does state the solar flux, but then also the general space weather. Gives you charts, graphs, live imaging of the sun, but that's really the only last website I know of.
Yeah, I'm having, when the internet's available to me, I'm having a harder and harder time getting the information that I'm after. It's just like there's blackouts on all kinds of stuff. So that's why my objective is to build my own facility and not have to rely on any of this stuff. And also, like what I was heading into in Landers, was to put these HF radio services back on the air, and so that people can get this stuff again without having to use the internet and the Trojan horse that comes with it.
All right. Well, thank you for answering my questions.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Winston. Hey, and if there's any chance you might be able to share some of your experiments with that, on YouTube or whatever, and you email it to us, we'd love to, share it with everybody.
Sure, probably.
Possible.
By letter would probably be the best, because, like Eric, I'm not a huge fan of digital nonsense.
Yeah.
So probably letter would be the best.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, what you could do is, write up your material and then put it on my website.
Okay. And then I'll get in contact with you if you wish.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
Just email it over. Okay. Thanks, Winston. Okay. Okay, let's see. If your number is ending 9386, and Eric, you're okay to go for a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I can keep going forever.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, if your number ends in 9386, please state your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. Eric, this is another Eric from Snowfield, Minnesota. Glad to chat here today. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. My question is in regards to Rife. One, can you tell us the relationship between Tesla and Rife, what they were doing, maybe the same? Maybe number two is, what was Rife doing to the human body that would kill or destruct any diseases and also restore the body's cells? And third, regarding Rife, what kind of machines can a layperson get a hold of today that would do these things that would help the human body?
Well, the information associated with Rife is kind of spotty and misinterpreted and worked over, and just like what happened with Tesla and what have you. And I'm not an expert on that, but I know about it, and I know what Rife went through and how he was put out of business. And I did have the opportunity, there was a location in San Diego County where there was a guy who was kind of a gold panner, charlatan type, I forget what his name was, John Crane, had taken possession of Rife's workshop. And he had his own ideas, like everybody does. It didn't really connect, but I picked around and I found some stuff there that that corresponded to what Tesla was doing, in that Rife was, after a lot of fussing around with various gaseous discharge tubes, had come up with a Tesla longitudinal beam tube, one electrode tube, kind of built like an X-ray tube. It had a hot cathode with a reflector on it, but there was no anode. It just projected outwards. The glass was particularly darkened, which indicated there was a lot of activity shooting out of the tube, and then he would he had a small AM radio transmitter of maybe about 200 watts, 150 watts, somewhere around there, and then a Tesla transformer to excite the tube, and then he modulated the AM transmitter with a complex of waveforms, that's where the mystery seems to lie, in what kind of wave shapes and frequencies were involved there. It's kind of questionable because he gives these frequencies to 5 or 6 significant digits, which was not possible to measure with that accuracy back then. So that's a little questionable. And he had developed a special microscope where he could view the organisms in their living state and then find out what waveform was necessary to basically disintegrate these organisms. So there's been quite a lot of spin-offs, things that are called Rife that really aren't Rife. They seem to work, so I can't say, that's necessarily a bad thing if people are producing things that have positive results. But nobody has the Rife beam tube, and that's a project that I wanted to pursue. There was a compendium on Rife's work that was printed, I think, fairly recently. It seems like an effort was made to block any view of that particular tube and to put an emphasis on tubes that didn't really seem to be able to put out much of anything that would be radiant. But I went through the diagrams and what have you and ignored everybody's diagram of their interpretation of Rife until I found one by Rife himself and found out that it was actually entirely different than what everybody else was doing. He was using the Tesla transformer. He was not using an LC circuit. These people, they make up names, and then everybody parrots them, and they have no connection with what's actually going on. So it's such a muddled situation that I can't really say too much definitive about it, but I know that if I was Bell Telephone Laboratories, I'd know exactly which way the research program would go, and I know exactly what I would strive for. But without the microscope, there's theoretically, you can't really make determinations of what waveforms have what kind of destructive effect on the pathological organisms. So that's the hang-up.
Sure. No, that sounds interesting. I appreciate that. Little review and consultation on both the work of Tesla and Rife there, so I appreciate that. Thanks, Eric.
Okay.
Yeah, and Eric from Minnesota, John Bedini had that microscope in his possession because he knew John Crane, who is an assistant to Rife, but John Crane was also a scam artist and started the signal generator scam, claiming you could just punch the frequencies in there and suddenly you have a Rife machine. John befriended him and started to buy his devices and learned after a short period of time that John Crane had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, and sued John and Gary Bedini for $25 million, and the county sheriff's office came out and confiscated the microscope and some other stuff, and that microscope wound up in IBM's hands. And I believe Marcel Vogel or something was related to all that. But you can go to vril.io, vril.io, and mouse over the products link, and there's a product called the RPX sideband generator, and I don't make any claims for it except that it's producing the frequencies the way that Hoyland came up with, and Philip Hoyland was the assistant of Rife who developed a sweep method to create these heterodyne frequencies, which are the addition of two frequencies and a subtraction of two frequencies, which wind up being the harmonics of the so-called Rife frequencies. And so you can find that on there. And this compilation report. Yeah, what was that?
vril.io?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, in the compilation that Eric is talking about, I can't remember the full name. It's something like the Rife instrument report or something like that. It's a few hundred pages. There's a lot of pictures and stuff, a lot of content. It's probably the best book on Rife. If you can hold on a second, I'll give you the exact name of it. That's one that Eric looked at, and I saw that the person who put that together had recently put out a new edition, which came out last year, and I haven't had a chance to look at what the new information is. Okay, let's see here. I'll give you the name of the book here pretty quick, and you can find the free download in the search engines. So it's called the Rife Machine Report, A History of Rife's Instruments and Frequencies. And there's a newer November 2018 edition, and it's 258 pages.
Okay.
Yeah, and besides that, you can
the best biographical and kind of technical description of Rife's work that I've seen was written by Jerry Vassilatos in a book he wrote called Lost Science. I think that would be helpful in getting a general understanding of where Rife was heading.
Yeah, I think you can still get copies of Lost Science on Amazon as a paperback. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the PDF is online too. And then also Bedini, rpxbook.com. That's Bedini's perspective on it with his dealings with John Crane, and at least from his perspective, what he was able to find out. Okay, you have any other questions? Or?
Nope, that was it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Let's see, we've got two more people with their hands raised here. Let's see, if your number is ending in 1635, go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Eric. My name is Inanna Snow, and I live at the meeting place of heaven and earth, Mount Shasta, California. I have a two-part question for you. First, are you a flat earther yet? And second, you are credited with having repeated all of Tesla's experiments. Have you or anyone you know reproduced the results of Tesla's 1901 patent for harvesting the cosmic rays?
For harvesting what?
Cosmic rays.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier, was this flux of cosmic radiation that Tesla detected. I come up with a couple of experimental ideas that I put out in the energetic form some time back to try to detect these things, but nobody really went anywhere with it. And those experiments I worked with a little bit, not a lot. So I can't say too much about the cosmic ray stuff, but I did demonstrate there was a kind of radiant matter, so to speak, that existed out of these certain tubes, like even the one I was talking about that Rife used. I think one of the Borderland videos, we kind of demonstrate some of that stuff where there's a kind of radiation that comes out of a dark fluorescent lamp. That one may have been called Tesla's longitudinal electricity. As regards the flat Earth, anybody that believes that is an idiot, because if the Earth is flat, I would not be pointing my antennas north to receive Europe. I would be pointing them west. And when the Navy flew me around the world and I took a trip to the Philippines, I would have shot straight out west of California, but instead we had to go to Alaska and Japan. So at any rate, people always seem to need to believe something funny. But at any rate, usually that's a good way to get the patch pulled in communicating with me, is to get involved in anything flat Earth.
Okay. Now this cosmic ray detector you were talking about, if anybody's, that's what you're referring to, right, Eric?
Yeah, it was back in the days when I was at John Polakowski's place. I was encouraging all these experiments on the energetic form. So there was I forgot what the project was called, but the easiest way was to just get a regular Geiger tube and then build this electrical circuit so that every time there was a hit in the Geiger tube, it would ring a gong. And actually, I thought that would be a good product, is you could have this thing in your house and with a telephone bell in it, and when the bell starts ringing profusely, you know that there's radiation coming in from somewhere. And then the next step was to try to figure out how to modify some kind of secondary emission photoelectric tube to respond to the Tesla cosmic rays, but nobody ever really carried on with that. There's one guy, I believe his name was David Dawson, that did come up with the Geiger tube method and managed to get the bell to ring every time there was an impact to the Geiger tube. And it kind of, I forget the exact circuit, but I remember when I was in high school, I built a so-called Geiger counter, ionization radiation detector, and it did things that the ones that you buy don't do. And then later, when I started presenting this stuff, it dawned on me that most of the coupling of the tube to the amplifier is done parallel connected, but I was using a series connection, and it allowed me to distinguish between all the various types of radiation that came in. They each have their own peculiar sound. So it's an interesting area for research, but there's not really a lot that I can do right now with the situation that I have. And it would be kind of off the beaten path, because I have to concentrate on the things that money have already been spent for and parts accumulated and what have you. But at any rate, if I was Thomas Edison with 100 people working around the clock, I'm sure there would be one group working on that.
Yeah, and if you want to see a discussion on the cosmic ray detector, David Dawson's replica, the circuit diagrams and all that, you can go to energeticforum.com. And on energeticforum.com, you can search for the Eric Dollard thread. There's several of them. A couple of them are closed just to preserve them, but there's one still open. But you can search for cosmic ray detector inside of one of the Eric Dollard threads, and that'll take you straight to all the discussion and circuit diagrams and replication and that kind of stuff.
So the way that Tesla approached it was to have a metal plate outside amalgamated with mercury so that it was a smooth, shiny surface, and then run that into what I call a Tesla converter, which is kind of like the old radio vibrators that used to be in the automobile radios. It's a little switch that charges the capacitor first off the metal plate, standing on insulators, out to be receiving the rays from the sun and what have you, and then the switch goes back and forth. This is what I use in my seismic amplifiers, and then it discharges the capacitor into a little low-frequency Tesla coil to boost the voltage, and then run that into whatever amplifiers, or afterwards to move a pen on a recorder or make a noise in a speaker. And that's how Tesla approached it. This patents kind of indicate it like that he used a pair of metal plates, and then he had a little commutator that spun, and then that would alternately charge a very low leakage mica capacitor first from the pickup plate, and then dump it into an oscillating circuit that would produce a transient waveform that then could be shown on an oscilloscope. So that might be a way to start. I think Jerry Vassilatos had a lot of information on that in his Vril Compendium, which is something like 10,000 pages of material. But and he talks a little bit about it in his Secrets of Cold War Technology. But that might be an easy way to start without fooling around with secondary emission and vacuum tubes and what have you, is to just use this Tesla converter method, which I think that one chapter out of the musical seismograph presentation shows how that works. But there's numerous Tesla patents that shows these little commutators that spin and pulse back and forth from one way to another, and anybody with significant technical competence should be able to derive out of that and do the experiments, and it would be interesting to see what comes out of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and I hope that you look into flat Earth more because it's the truth of our reality. Have a good day.
All right, thanks. Let's see if your if your number is ending in 5959. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Eric. My name is Charlie. I'm from Northern Virginia. My question is on the theoretical basis of sound. Sound is taught, at least it was to me, as an analogy to waves moving transversely, for example, from a rock falling in a pond. But I'm not sure if this is the case, so I firstly wanted to know, is sound a longitudinal or transverse phenomena? And furthermore, when something vibrates, could it be described as vibrating the ether, such that, like in a harmonic situation, does this create sort of spatial geometries of the ether? And what is kind of the correct way of thinking about this?
Yeah, sound is longitudinal. So it kind of serves as an analog where the ether could be the air and the oscillator generating the longitudinal waveforms then transmit longitudinally through the air. That's what Tesla believed, that the electric medium was actually a very fine gas, probably a Mendeleev pre-hydrogen series gas, and that electric waves were longitudinal transmissions through that medium. It's kind of questionable whether that theory holds up for everything. Tesla was kind of an obsessive about things, and he would make an absolution in one configuration and ignore experimental verified evidence in another configuration. So it makes it kind of hard to actually confirm what is really going on, particularly being that he didn't write any books.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, you had another question about like the geometry or what have you. I didn't quite understand what you're saying.
Just in the sense of like when you have like a harmonic situation, especially when it comes to like Pythagorean ratios with sound, what's the way of thinking about what's happening in that case when there's harmony? Is there a way that I could think about it? It's kind of theoretical to me, so I was kind of wondering how you think about that.
Yeah, that's more of a numerological situation.
Okay.
The Pythagorean stuff, and then you're going to get, kind of a strange world that comes out of that most people don't really know about, maybe shouldn't get involved with.
Okay.
But there are circuits that I have developed to produce what I call the Pythagorean waveform, which is all of those tones. I haven't been able to build it yet because I don't have the facilities. I have the components, but I don't have the racks and the space and what have you set up for it. So then you're getting into it's kind of a resonant situation. So a tuning fork is an example, of a single frequency resonant situation. So there's a certain geometry involved with the tuning fork, and that allows it to produce a sustained oscillation, and then its influence on the atmosphere produces longitudinal sound waves, even though the wave on the tuning fork is, for the most part, transverse.
Okay. Great. Yeah, well, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. Let's see. We're going on an hour and a half now. If anybody has any final questions, go ahead and hit *5, and it'll put a little symbol by your number, and I can unmute you. And so, yeah, the next year's conference, second weekend in July 2020 in Hayden, Idaho, at the Hayden Eagles Lodge in Hayden, Idaho, which is about an hour, it's about 50 minutes to an hour from the Spokane International Airport here in Spokane, Washington. And Eric will be giving 2 presentations there, which we covered at the beginning of this call. And on EnergyScienceConference.com, that's where you can pre-register for free, and we'll open up for ticket sales probably in January or February. And if you click on the 2020 conference schedule, you can kind of see the agenda that's being updated there periodically. Let's see, if your number ends in 3415, go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question. Hello? Yeah, if your number ends in 3415, you're unmuted.
Hello, Aaron. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name's Robert from Indianapolis. Actually texted or emailed at one point with one of your colleagues for last year's conference in Idaho. I wasn't able to make it last minute, but I always appreciate kind of these types of discussions, especially with somebody like Mr. Dollard. And Eric, my question for you today would be that when you are, doing your experiments, when you're out in the field, when you're giving lectures, and you're thinking about all these things at one time, what role does gravity play in your perception of electricity?
That I have not made a connection with. That's the question that everybody has been asking for a long, long time. And even Einstein threw up his hands on that one for the most part and just came up with some goofy curved space concept. So Heaviside attempts to come up with some kind of mathematical formulation, but there's not really a lot I can say about it. Not a lot that anybody can say about it.
Fair enough. It's a very interesting and kind of foundational question, and I know that when I watched one of actually Aaron's videos, there was something about how we've misunderstood gravity for so long as what it means in terms of what force it is actually exerting, upon us. And it's something that science doesn't always do well in the classroom, is convey these types of things. Because if somebody like yourself, Mr. Dollard, who has worked at depths and magnitudes of electronics that most people can't even fathom and probably wouldn't want to anyway, and it stumps you in that way, then I would say, whatever we're teaching in the schools needs to be dramatically re-envisioned, if you will. I don't know if that's a fair way of putting it or not, but I'll leave that to the experts. Thanks for the call, both. I'll mute myself now.
There is actually there's one thing that I read rather recently that's an interesting interpretation of gravity. I've been studying for the past 3 months now all the writings of Dr. Wilhelm Reich. You've probably heard of him, the orgone guy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he wrote a book called Cosmic Superimposition. And he has his own view of gravity in that book. And the three books that I found most helpful in understanding his work is that one, Cosmic Superimposition. The other one is called The Cancer Biopathy, and the third one is called The Bion Experiment. And he has an ergonomic explanation of how gravity comes about, and a few other space induction concepts that actually I found quite interesting and plausible explanations. And maybe you might want to try that as just a complete breakaway alternative to the existing non-functional concepts of gravity. There's also the Le Sage particle theory of gravity, which is interesting, and that connects to the Tesla cosmic ray. There's a lot of pros and cons with that. You might want to try those two approaches and see what kind of ideas it gives you.
Those are great recommendations. I will absolutely check those books out, and I'd be wondering, how after looking at those things and looking at some more of Tesla's works, how different in terms of that broader understanding you really get.
Okay.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Okay, let's see. Here's I'm unmuting you right now. If you can say your name, where you're from, go ahead and ask your question. Yeah, if you just heard me unmute you, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, hi, Aaron. This is Frank in California. And hi, Eric. My question is about the Tesla coil and coils in general. Does a coil have two resonant frequencies? One that is based on the coil inductance and the interwinding capacitance, and the other resonant frequency based on the electrical length of the wire of the coil?
Yeah, it's actually the two frequencies are, one is the, you could call the longitudinal resonant frequency, and the other one is the transverse resonant frequency. And there's a very complex relation between inductance and capacitance. This is something I got really deep into in my last presentation, the Colorado Springs presentation. So it's there's two modes that the coil will operate at simultaneously or independently. The engineering objective would be to bring those two modes into a common frequency, which is something that I have not figured out how to do. The thing is, there's no way to really get in there and measure these various inductances and capacitances that the coil produces. You can't, it's hard to calculate them geometrically, but I think the Borderland videos, the early ones on the Tesla longitudinal electricity and the, I forget what the other one was called, transverse and longitudinal waves, I may have gotten into that.
Okay,
so
yeah, that was...
What's going on. You have the same situation in a waveguide. If you have a waveguide that's short-circuited at the end and you excite the thing, you'll find there'll be a pair of frequencies because you have a transverse mode and a longitudinal mode. So I came up with a circuit representation. It uses two inductances and two capacitances rather than one inductance and one capacitance to try to do this in an analog fashion, but I haven't had the occasion to really experiment much with that. But that's kind of what's going on there. It's a two-mode type of oscillation because instead of a double energy transient, now you have a quadruple energy transient. So that will produce multiple frequency or wavelength arrangement.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, the transverse mode is the LC part of it, the inductance and capacitance, and the longitudinal is the electrical length of the wire, or the resulting.
No, it's the other way around.
Oh, okay. It's the other way around.
That's kind of a crude way to put it, but it's a workable idea. It all depends on how you define inductance and capacitance. And the definition becomes a complex quantity in space when you're dealing with things like a Tesla coil. And that has not really been thoroughly worked out to an engineering level. I did the best that was possible in the last presentation. If you're at all, inclined on an engineering level, I think you would find that very helpful.
Okay, yeah, that was the other part to the question is what papers or books or articles you could recommend to learn more about this. And you mentioned some of the work from Borderland.
Yeah, there were the videos.
The videos? Okay.
Transverse and longitudinal. Aaron might know what those are at. But
yeah.
with regard to what you were particularly talking about, I would recommend the last presentation. That's kind of the best I've done so far in figuring this difficult situation out in very simple algebraic terms and what have you. That and the two Borderland videos, I think Aaron can give you the names of.
Yeah, so if you go to ericpdollard.com, and then in the main menu bar, there's a link for free videos. And if you mouse over that, there's a little pop-up menu with 5 links. The very bottom one says transverse and longitudinal electric waves and Tesla's longitudinal electricity. And if you click on that, it'll bring you to a page where both videos are embedded, and so you can watch them right there for free. And also related to that, in 2016, I took a video down at Eric's shop where he was kind of doing the similar experiments on the bench with these networks. I can't find a link on the website right now, but if you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Aaron Murakami, and you search for extraluminal, let's see, transverse and longitudinal analog network with Eric Dollard, and that was posted on January 13, 2016. And that's kind of, I would watch that after watching the original Borderland videos. Watch the Borderland ones first on his website on the free videos page, and then watch that one on my YouTube channel.
Okay, all right, thanks, Aaron. One more, Eric, if you could comment on, recently there was a $500 network analyzer that was mentioned, and can you comment about how that's being used to tune that Tesla system?
Well, that's something that Adrian was working on, so I'm not familiar with exactly how he goes about it, but you should be able to get the two frequencies using that method. So it's kind of basically you're just sweeping the frequency until you see a kind of like a zero crossing where the phase angles end up coinciding at resonance, and then the net angle is 0 degrees. So that's kind of what you're looking for. Either that or it's a resonant peak where the current or the electrostatic potential will rise sharply at a certain frequency. So he got pretty deep into that at the last conference, so he might have some published material on that that will help you. I'm not certain about that, but I think Aaron would know.
Yeah, and he'll be presenting on that in depth at the next conference. But if you go to emediapress.com, and in the search bar, you can just type Adrian, A-D-R-I-N, and there's one result that comes up, AM Innovations by Adrian Marsh. And if you click the continue link to look at the full post, for one, there's a link to the actual vector network analyzer that he used and demonstrated. I bought one. I just haven't had time to hook it up and learn to calibrate and use it yet. But Adrian said that he has one of an older $100,000 Hewlett-Packard analyzer, and his $500 unit gives pretty much the same results. And then at the bottom of that, there's a link to his website, and if you search through his website, he has posted a bunch of graphs and a lot of screenshots from that analyzer, and you might be able to find what's in there. And if not, you might want to come to the conference and check out Adrian's presentation, which will go pretty heavy exactly into that.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. And thanks a lot, Eric.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Okay, let's see. Maybe we could take one final question. Winston, hold on a second. Let me unmute you here. Okay, go ahead, Winston.
Hi. Hi. So Eric, in reference to gravity, I forgot the other name of the guy right now, but is setting the Earth and the Sun and understanding it in an electrical point of view. The other day, I was toiling around with some of Steinmetz's equations and some of yours too. I think also a few from Oliver Heaviside. And the interesting part is that I was able to find an electrical gradient and intensity of the magnetic and dielectric field of both the Sun and the Earth. Now, for the Sun, the interesting part is that the known extent of the Sun's gravitational field, I forgot, it's in the billions of miles, matched what was found on paper, meaning the electrical, how far the magnetic fields extended using just simple power line equations matched what is known today. So, and then also my other thing was, what are your thoughts on Otis T. Carr? I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but there really isn't a whole lot of evidence behind his findings. What is your opinion?
Yeah, I've heard that name, but I don't really know anything about it. Aaron probably knows who it is and what he did, and as far as as what you determine from equations and calculations. It would be nice if you wrote that up and put it out there for people to see.
Because I've, how should I say, I've presented this before to a group of people, even including some higher up officials and instructors of mine, and they completely dismissed it. So.
Yeah.
Well, if you scan it in and send it to me, if that's something you don't mind getting posted, you know, I can post it on the site and send out links. You know,
okay.
and also on the electrodynamic seismic forecasting concept, whether you're using the loop antenna or you're stretching out 1,000 feet of wire, any of those experiments, if you happen to come to next year's conference, is that something you might be able to do, maybe a half an hour summary on your experiments so other people can see that, you know?
I'll see, because balancing things out with school, I'm not entirely sure at the moment.
Okay.
But sounds interesting. I've been wanting to go to one of them for a while.
As far as Otis Carr, possibly the best answer you're going to get is from Jim Murray. I think he worked with him and or his associates. And in 2012, at the first Energy Science Technology Conference, at that time it was called the Bedini-Lindemann Technology Conference, Jim Murray gave a presentation called Tesla's Hidden Discoveries. And let me verify. Tesla's Hidden Discoveries.com. Yeah, so Tesla's Hidden Discoveries.com. And that's Jim Murray's first presentation at our conference. And he kind of goes into his experience with that. I think he discusses Otis Carr and some of these missing notebooks and stuff like that. You know, Jim Murray's been on a search for that, you know, stuff relating to that for a long time, but he might be the best one to ask. And if you sent an email...
What did Otis Carr do?
Well,
so
I think it was... Yeah, go ahead, Winston.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, well, you probably got the story down better than I do.
Okay, well, apparently Otis Carr, when he was younger, he met Nikola Tesla in the 1920s at the famous New Yorker hotel. He took him under his wing and then just began showing him the concepts regarding anti-gravity. Now, he developed this in the 1960s into a company, I think OTC Enterprises, if I remember correctly. And he demonstrated these small crafts, and his main concept was that it had to do with the rotation of his device. I won't get into the nitty-gritty parts of it, but it had to do with the rotation, and that there wasn't a whole lot of demonstration evidence, to say. So most of his things just were swept under the rug and never heard of again.
Yeah, there's a book that somebody sent me fairly recently on this whole gravity thing, and now I forgot where it's at. I don't remember. But, God, I wish I knew that now to direct you to it. But at any rate, as far as this gravity thing goes and what have you, is somebody has figured it out, because not too far away here is the test site, national security area, and they apparently employed this in what's called the stealth aircraft, and it has electrogravitic technologies built into it. So it works. If it works for them, it can work for somebody else. But I would imagine that that's probably kind of highly classified information, and if you made a parallel discovery, you might end up getting yourself in trouble when you discover.
Because using your equations, the force among the conductors as well as Steinmetz's equations, to get a force of about, 500,000 grams against the Earth, if I'm correct, it would need 3,800 amps or so. I forgot that. I have the paper somewhere, but it requires a significant amount of power.
Yeah. Well, I kind of like the Wilhelm Reich view of what causes things to attract towards each other. So right now I'm kind of leaning towards that, but that's not something that gives you any kind of really engineering solutions. But it's a good model to start with, in that this orgone flux definitely does exist and is measurable and can be concentrated and directed. So, but in general, that's kind of outside of my area of understanding. So I don't really like to propose a lot of things that are kind of ideas or what have you, unless I know that they actually work.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Winston. Let's see. We're getting close to 2 hours. You going to go ahead and wrap it up, Eric, or see if anybody else has any questions? None right now. Okay. Well, we'll do a last chance here. If anybody has any questions, hit 5 star, and I can unmute you. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, EnergyScienceConference.com. You can pre-register for free. It is limited seating, and it sells out every year. It's going to be an amazing conference. It'll be at least 4 days, possibly 5, and Eric will be giving 2 presentations. There'll probably be about 20 presentations between about 17, 18 different presenters. There'll be a lot of demonstrations. Also, if you can help support EPD Laboratories, Inc. to support Eric's work, you can go to ericpdollard.com, and in the right column, if you scroll down, you'll see a PayPal button. If you could donate by PayPal online, or you can donate by through the mail. The address is there. Also, if you want to correspond directly with Eric, his general delivery Lone Pine address is there on the site. And if you write a letter, he'll usually write you back. Okay, let's see. If your number is ending in 1976, go ahead and say your name, where you're from, and go ahead and ask your question.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, yes. I have a question pertaining to music.
Okay, if you can speak up some, it's a little bit muffled.
I have a question pertaining to music.
Okay.
Dealing with like harmonics, I'm trying to find like instruments basically that hit that sweet spot with the nervous system as you focus in on it. And basically, my great-grandfather, I remember going down into his basement, and he just had the walls strung with like all these weird string instruments that he had made up, and I think that's maybe what he was doing. Are there any instruments that you know of, any older ones that maybe we can start with?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what you're trying to do, so I can't suggest. Probably the most effective waveform synthesizer is the pipe organ, or some kind of analog equivalent. I'm trying to come up with this Pythagorean method to do it, but I don't have the means to follow that through, so I don't know exactly what type of waveforms you make. But one thing I do know is I listen for a few hours every day with 600 watts of power to the Bach organ music and Handel choirs and all that. And if you sit in between the speakers and allow that to vibrate your body, I think that's probably the only thing that's keeping me alive anymore.
Wow. What would you need to really get figure out these Pythagorean waveforms? Because I've been reading a book.
Well, I've got the thing figured out. In fact, there's a whole sub-presentation on it in the musical seismograph. And I wrote some stuff on the energetic form about the origins of the musical scale, and it's, in fact, actually I produced a whole presentation called The Power of the Ether as related to music and electricity. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have seen that. I think that was the one where the quality was just terrible.
Well, the quality shouldn't be.
No, wait. You're talking about the interview on YouTube with that same name?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not it. If you go to powerofether.com, ether spelled with an A-E-T-H-E-R, yeah, powerofether.com, that's about a 4-hour or so presentation given, I think that was the 2015 conference, downtown Coeur d'Alene, and that, yeah, so that goes into it.
Okay, so you're talking about like Bach and Handel music in between the speakers. I'm familiar with that, and the whole thing with the organs and polyphonic music. Like I'm familiar with your talks on that, but I'm a lot more interested in what your knowledge of the musical side of this type of stuff. There's not as many videos as far as the musical side that you've put out. I mean, I know it's a lot vague and it's hard stuff to teach to people, but I have been studying and messing around with a lot of different frequencies. Basically, I had to heal my nervous system, and I helped do it mainly with frequencies after a really bad accident that caused grand mal seizures that put me into a coma. So I'm interested in any of that.
Subject. I think a lot of people have produced material on in one way or another. I know I received a book of some woman that uses sound for healing and what have you. And I'm not really an expert on the subject, but as far as the harmonic structure and what scales and frequencies and what have you, and how these all came about, and how to basically quantify them and then be able to produce them between the musical seismograph and the power of the ether. That's about the best I can offer right now on that subject, particularly being that I'm not active in it right now. But one thing that I have found interesting is there's two projects that I have been working on in the writing that when I engage in these projects and I listen to the Bach organ music, is all of a sudden there's a clarity and details and things that you wouldn't notice otherwise unless you start to become familiar with the structure analytically. So one was the versor algebra, which is basically an extension of the polyphonic process. That's why they call it polyphase power. And the other one was the numerological determination of the Pythagorean frequency ratio relationships, which I think there's actually a paper on the website called, I forget what's Pythagorean something maybe, or Aaron might know what that is. I think that should be on the website. And then there's the actual demonstration, the best I could do, not having a Pythagorean scale keyboard and not being a musician myself, but then I get into the whole numerological structure and then interpret them from the modern equal temperament standpoint, which is somewhat erroneous, but nevertheless it shows you all these relationships. And then when you go and listen to Bach's music after studying and developing all that stuff for a few months, it's like a whole other universe. So
I understand. Yeah, you could actually kind of correlate
how you can go about that.
Wow, that's beautiful, correlating. So it's almost like it causes a harmonious pattern within the vibration as you're focusing in on it, and you can almost start to sense things that are kind of piggybacking in on the harmonies, because it's all kind of tying it together.
Yeah, it takes a lot of concentration to listen to that music. It's kind of beyond most people because their lives are so saturated with distractions that there's no way that anybody can really, no one really has that level of concentration anymore. So you'd have to develop that, or maybe already have it. I don't know what to say, but I've been involved with this stuff since I was 19 years old, and so I'm quite familiar with, the overall panorama of music from that era. But I'm not a musician, and there's a lot of things that musicians would know that I don't. So I can't speak with absolute authority on that subject, but I think I put out a lot of material. There is a book that I base the Power of Ether presentation on. Usually all my presentations are based on some kind of a very important book or a set of books. It's called the Music of the Spheres. I believe the author's name is Jamie Jameson. You'll have to watch out for there was a academic reaction to it, and a Einstein popularizer named Guy Murchie also wrote a book with the exact same title. It has no relation to any of the stuff we're talking about. You want the Jamie Jameson one. I think you could find that helpful. There's an apparatus that I developed that I'm quite anxious to build again. If I can ever get the means to build anything, it's called the musical television. And you can actually see the anima of the music on the screen. It scares some people. This thing is alive. There's some discussion of that in the Jameson book. So that's like another avenue to go. There's loads of experiments that can be done and what have you that I don't have the facilities to carry this stuff out, even though I would like to. So again, I'll say, I've got certain angles on this, but I can't give you anything, with absolute concrete absolution of, what to build and what phase angles or any of this stuff. So until I can build this Pythagorean analog network and do some other experiments, it's a wide open field. So you'll kind of have to handle it on your own.
Okay, so that book is The Music of the Spheres, Music, Science, and the Natural Order of the Universe, and the author's name is Jamie James.
James, okay.
Yeah, Jamie-James. Let's see, also there's a paper, a series of graphs or drawings that Eric put out years ago. Let's see, the name is Symbolic Operators, Steinmetz to Pythagoras, Backward in Time, and that has a lot of the musical scale diagrams relating to Pythagoras, Pythagorean frequency chart and all that. If you go to energeticforum.com and you search for that Symbolic Operators, Steinmetz to Pythagoras, Backward in Time, you can download all that stuff for free on there. I don't know if it's been put into one PDF. It's kind of spread throughout multiple posts. And most likely it would be posted under Eric's account. Username is T-Rex, T-Rex, like the dinosaur. Yeah, and then let's see, Power of Ether, that was a presentation from 2015. And then specific to the nervous system, I do know for a fact that 292 cycles per second is effective for that. That's based on the Nogier frequency set, N-O-G-I-E-R. Paul Nogier was a French doctor or biologist or something, and he developed the ear acupuncture system more fully than even what the Chinese have developed. But if you search online for the Nogier frequency set, you'll see that the frequency of 292 corresponds to the nervous system, since that's ectoderm tissue, skin, eyes, brain, teeth, fingernails, and nervous system and acupuncture system is all 292 cycles a second. I actually gave a presentation that goes into that pretty heavy. emediapress.com/Aaron Murakami/red light. And that's my presentation called Red Light Power. I've about 20 years experience working with some medical doctors, Qigong master, and some others who worked with the pioneers of those modalities. But if you're looking for healing purposes, you can use those frequencies electromagnetically with a coil, electrically, or with sound.
Wow. Okay, that's a good one. Thank you. 292 hertz.
Yeah, 292, which is a harmonic of 73. Nogier did a radial artery pulse reflex test where he would measure somebody's pulse, and he would dial an electromagnetic coil into different frequencies, and he recorded all the ones that had a stimulating response, and years later found out they were all harmonics of the musical D note in whatever particular scale. I don't have a background in music, so I don't know what scale that would be. 72 would be in balance. So 72, 144, 288, but that's balance. But what you want to do is stimulate. You never want to tone down. And so all the multiples of 73, 292 is the one for ectoderm. And if you multiply that by 2, and you multiply that by 2, then you get the resonant frequency for the tissue types based on embryologic origin. So you're going to have the ectoderm tissue type meso, and endoderm tissue types. And you can find a lot of free information online for Paul Nogier and the Nogier frequency set for that.
Harmonograph, Anthony Ashton.
Yeah, and what is that?
It's a book. It's a book that correlates all the Pythagorean math to, it shows you how to build this little four-legged instrument with swinging pendulums that paints out the angular representations of waveforms from different angles.
Okay, harmonograph. Okay.
It's called Harmonograph, Anthony Ashton. I think this book is absolutely parallel. I'm a Gemini, so I see the connection of, or the fact that this is going to help bring together the mathematics and the electrical and the musicians and the understanding of this stuff.
Yeah, and I was just talking to Eric recently about this, is that, you know, there's the whole deal between the 440 hertz and 432.
Oh, yeah.
What musicians can tune their A frequency to, but in fact it should not be 432, it's 426 and 2/3.
426?
Yeah, 426.66 repeating. So it's not 432, but as Eric was saying, it's not equal temperament, so that kind of scale is not going to sound normal to most people who are conditioned to the equal temperament. Do you want to spend a minute and maybe mention something about that, Eric?
Yeah, that's based on C being 256, which is a Pythagorean number, so to speak. So when you'd have to see the presentation, the musical seismograph presentation, to see the actual harmonic chart, but the Pythagorean frequencies are all based on harmonics. They're not based on just some kind of scaling process or whatever, like equal temperament, which is the 12th root of +1. So I think that's where the 292 for the D might come in. I don't have the chart anywhere available to see what the Pythagorean D is. The D and the B do not fit well in the harmonic series, and therefore cannot really be considered harmonic or Pythagorean frequencies. But they are involved in the scale in general, but they don't work out very well.
Okay.
I would say, what do you know about like ratios, the ratios of waveforms versus just like focusing on the frequency numbers and how they correlate to one another? Or is that how you basically get the ratio?
Well, that's what the whole paper is all about, is the ratios, the numerological ratios. So you'd have to go to that particular, either if the paper's on the website, I'm not certain, or that particular chapter out of the musical seismograph presentation, and everything's all given there. I can't really say that off the top of my head right now. That was done years ago. So I think I pretty much said all I can possibly say on this subject right now.
Okay. Well, if you don't have, let's see, any final questions or?
No, just thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
And keep
sure.
writing.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any final words, Eric?
No, I think I'm QRU, as they say in the ham radio world.
Okay. Again, check out EnergyScienceConference.com and get pre-registered for next July's conference. And you can check out eMediaPress.com for a list of all the presentations on the home page and on the Home To link, which will come up if you mouse over the Home link. And Cyber33 will give you 33% off all books and videos. That includes all of Eric's. That's capital CYBER, all letters capital Cyber33. You can put into the shopping cart, hit the apply button, and that'll give you the discount. And please consider donating to EPD Laboratories, Inc., which is a 501c3 nonprofit. All donations are tax deductible, and this helps to pay the bills and keeps the building in business. And that, of course, supports Eric's work, whether even if it's just him, continuing to write. And you can find the PayPal button or the mailing address to send the payment. And again, if you want to write Eric directly, you can do so at the Lone Pine General Delivery address listed on the website. And I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So thanks a lot, everybody, for joining, and we'll get this on YouTube soon. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.